Okay, you're thinking about owning a McDonald's franchise. From the outside, it looks like one of the safest restaurant bets imaginable. A famous sign, a familiar menu, national advertising, digital ordering, and customers who already know what they want before they enter the parking lot. But the brand's popularity does not turn every dollar of sales into owner income. A restaurant can collect millions of dollars at the counter while food, payroll, rent, franchise charges, repairs, debt payments, and required reinvestment consume most of that money. This breakdown will show what it can cost to enter the system, how the restaurant earns revenue, where the cash goes, what the owner actually controls, and why two McDonald's locations with similar sales can produce very different financial outcomes. The first thing to understand is that buying a McDonald's is not the same as buying an ordinary independent restaurant. You are not purchasing the arches, the recipes, the national advertising platform, or the right to operate however you choose. You are entering a contractual system. The corporation provides the brand, operating standards, training, technology, approved supply structure, menu framework, and ongoing support. The franchisee supplies capital leadership, local execution, and responsibility for the restaurant's day-to-day results. That distinction matters because the restaurant may feel like your business operationally. While many of the most important rules remain controlled by the franchisor, it also explains why the corporation's financial statements cannot tell you what one franchise owner earns. McDonald's Corporation reports fees, rent, royalties, sales from company-operated restaurants, and other corporate revenue. A franchisee reports the economics of an individual operating company, customer sales at the restaurant, food and packaging, crew wages, management, payroll, utilities, repairs, insurance, local expenses, franchise payments, debt service, taxes, and reinvestment. Those are different businesses sitting inside the same system. McDonald's reported more than 45,000 restaurants worldwide at the end of 2025, with approximately 95% franchised. That heavily franchised structure is central to the company's model because the corporation receives recurring rent and royalty streams linked to restaurant sales. The franchisee, however, earns only what remains after operating the location and meeting every obligation attached to the agreement. This channel breaks down ownership exactly at that level. Not the impressive sales number on the front page, but the money that remains after the building, equipment, workers, suppliers, lenders, franchisor, and tax authorities are paid. Now start with admission. McDonald's does not present U.S. franchise ownership as a simple transaction, where the first qualified buyer wires money and receives a store. Its current U.S. franchising materials say candidates are typically expected to have at least $750,000 in non-borrowed, unencumbered personal funds. The company also recommends at least $100,000 of working capital for each restaurant and an additional $75,000 for possible relocation expenses. Meeting those financial thresholds does not guarantee that a restaurant will be offered, and a larger investment may be necessary for particular markets or multi-restaurant opportunities. That is an important correction to a common assumption. The cash requirement is not the total purchase price. It is a measure of financial capacity before the transaction. A candidate may still need financing for part of an acquisition or investment, but borrowed funds do not replace the required unencumbered resources. The company is looking for an operator who can survive unexpected costs, support the business during weak periods, and absorb the practical disruption of training and relocation. The estimated investment depends on the restaurant format and the specific transaction. The 2025 U.S. franchise disclosure materials place a traditional restaurant's estimated initial investment broadly in the neighborhood of roughly $1.5 million to about $2.7 million, including a standard $45,000 initial franchise fee in the ordinary case. A buyer should not treat the bottom or top of that range as a quote for a particular store. Existing restaurant purchases depend on negotiated business value, equipment condition, required upgrades, financing, local sales, LAS economics, and the terms attached to that location. This is where acquisition and new development separate. A newly developed restaurant may require construction-related investment, equipment, signage, seating, decor, opening inventory, pre-opening expenses, and enough cash to operate while the customer base stabilizes. An existing restaurant already has sales history workers, operating routines, and installed equipment. But the buyer may pay for proven cash flow and may inherit near-term renovation or replacement needs. A cheaper purchase can become expensive if the kitchen equipment is nearing the end of its useful life. A higher purchase price can be rational if the site has durable traffic, strong operations, and a long runway before a major reinvestment. Then comes training. McDonald's says franchise candidates must complete a program that generally lasts 6 to 12 months and combines practical restaurant experience with classroom learning. That is not decorative orientation. The operating model depends on repeatability, speed, food safety, labor scheduling, inventory controls, service standards, maintenance routines, and management systems. A candidate has to understand the restaurant at ground level, because ownership problems rarely arrive as elegant spreadsheet questions. They arrive as a broken fryer during a rush, a staffing gap before breakfast, a delivery discrepancy, a customer complaint, an equipment alarm, or a manager who cannot cover the next shift. Training also creates an opportunity cost, even when the program works around a candidate's availability. Months spent learning the system have a real economic value. Travel, temporary living expenses, reduced attention to another career, and delayed acquisition should be included in the personal planning process. McDonald's also tells candidates to remain flexible about relocation, because the company cannot predict which restaurants will be available after training. Your preferred city may not be where the opportunity appears. Once the keys change hands, the most visible number is restaurant sales. The 2025 disclosure reported that U.S. traditional restaurants open at least one year produced average annual sales of about $4 million during 2024. With a median somewhat below that level, that is a powerful sales platform. But average sales are not a promise, and sales are not profit. The spread between individual restaurants can be enormous because airport traffic, suburban drive-through volume, urban delivery demand, local competition, operating hours, menu mix, and execution all affect customer counts and average transaction value. Revenue begins with food and beverage purchases across the counter, drive-through kiosks, mobile orders, and delivery channels. Each channel can have different economics. A busy drive-through may process high volume efficiently. If the kitchen and lane are designed well, delivery can add orders, but it can also introduce platform commissions, packaging requirements, order accuracy pressure, and operational congestion. Digital promotions may increase traffic while reducing the amount collected on a specific transaction. Breakfast can improve use of the building during early hours, but it requires staffing and preparation before much of the market is awake. The owner, therefore, watches more than total revenue. Transaction count shows how many orders are being served. Average check shows how much each customer spends. Product mix shows whether sales are concentrated in items with stronger or weaker contribution margins. Labor percentage shows whether scheduling matches demand. Food and paper percentage shows whether purchasing, waste, portioning, and theft are controlled. Service times reveal whether the restaurant is converting demand into completed orders or losing customers in a slow line. Now look at the payments connected to the franchise relationship. A traditional franchise commonly includes an initial franchise fee or royalty payments based on gross sales, required advertising spending, and rent associated with the restaurant site. Current agreements and older agreements may not carry identical percentages, so one store's fee schedule should not be copied onto another. Recent disclosure summaries indicate that service fees can be 4 or 5% of gross sales, depending on the applicable agreement, while required advertising spending is generally no less than 4%. Rent is location-specific and may include base and percentage components. That last point is crucial. McDonald's frequently controls the real estate by owning the property or holding the underlying lease, then granting the franchisee the right to operate at the site. The franchisee may invest heavily in the restaurant business without owning the land beneath it. From the corporation's perspective, that structure supports long-term control over locations and creates rental income. From the operator's perspective, it reduces the need to acquire commercial land directly, but it also creates a major recurring obligation and limits the real estate equity the franchisee builds. Food and packaging usually form another large cost block. Every burger, bun, sauce packet, carton cup, napkin, and bag must arrive before it can be sold. High volume creates purchasing scale, but it also creates exposure to commodity costs and waste. A 1 percentage point change in food and paper cost on $4 million of sales equals $40,000 a year. That is why small operational errors matter. Overportioning, inaccurate inventory, spoilage, theft, rejected deliveries, and poorly controlled promotions can quietly remove a meaningful share of store-level cash flow. Payroll can be even more sensitive because a restaurant needs people across multiple dayparts. Crew members prepare food, take orders, assemble meals, clean equipment, receive deliveries, and maintain service. Managers schedule labor, supervise shifts, handle cash controls, solve customer issues, enforce safety procedures, train workers, and keep the operation moving when demand changes by the minute. Wages are only part of labor cost. Payroll taxes, benefits where applicable, recruiting, uniforms, training time, overtime, turnover, and management coverage also matter. The economic challenge is that labor cannot be reduced mechanically. Scheduled to many people and payroll consumes the margin. Scheduled to few and service slows. Mistakes increase. Cleanliness declines. Employees burn out, and customers may not return. The best labor result is not the lowest percentage on a single day. It is the staffing level that protects speed, quality, safety, and sales while avoiding unnecessary hours. Then add utilities, maintenance, insurance, technology, security, waste removal, pest control, professional services, licenses, local fees, bank charges, and repairs. A restaurant is a collection of machines operating for long hours in heat, grease, moisture, and constant motion, refrigeration, grills, fryers, beverage systems, ice machines, ventilation, point-of-sale equipment, kiosks, menu boards, drive-through systems, and plumbing can fail. Some repairs are small. Others demand immediate spending because a failed system can restrict the menu or close the restaurant. Capital expenditure is different from an ordinary repair. Replacing a major piece of equipment, completing a required remodel, updating digital systems, or renovating the dining room may create a large cash outflow that does not appear as a normal monthly operating expense. Accounting can spread the cost through depreciation, but the bank account experiences the purchase when payments are made. That is why a restaurant can report an accounting profit and still have a difficult cash year. Consider Maya, who is reviewing a simplified educational model for a traditional U.S. restaurant with $4 million in annual sales. This is not a prediction of what a McDonald's owner will earn. It is a clean illustration of how the expense stack works. Assume her applicable service fee is 5%, required advertising is 4%, and site rent equals 12%. Those three items consume $840,000, or 21% of sales. Now assume food and packaging use 29%, labor uses 25%, and other operating expenses use 14%. Those assumptions remove another $2,720,000. The restaurant has $440,000 remaining before interest, principal payments, income taxes, major capital spending, and any owner compensation not already included in payroll. That remaining amount is 11% of sales. But it is not automatically the owner's take-home income. If Maya financed part of the purchase, the lender receives scheduled payments, the interest portion is an expense, while principal repayment reduces debt but still consumes cash. If a remodel is required, cash must be reserved or borrowed. If Maya works full-time as the operating leader, and her market trade compensation is included in payroll, part of her economic reward appears as salary and part may appear as distributions. If she hires an experienced general manager to replace her daily labor, payroll increases, but the business may become less dependent on her presence. Now change only 3 assumptions. Food cost rises by 1 percentage point, labor rises by 2 points, and rent is 14 rather than 12%. 5 percentage points disappear, equal to $200,000 on $4 million of sales. The store still looks busy. Revenue is unchanged. Customers may see no difference, but the amount remaining before debt, taxes, capital spending, and owner distributions falls from $440,000, $140,000, that example demonstrates the main contradiction of franchise ownership. Brand strength can reduce customer acquisition uncertainty without eliminating operating risk. The arches may bring traffic, but they do not control the wage market in your neighborhood, the condition of your equipment, the rent attached to your site, the cost of financing your purchase, or the quality of your management team. Break-even should therefore be calculated from the restaurant's actual cost structure, not from a national sales headline. Fixed obligations include items that do not fall quickly when sales weaken, such as base rent, management salaries, insurance, software, debt payments, and certain contracted services. Variable costs rise with sales, including food, packaging, transaction charges, and some labor. The contribution from each additional sale must first cover those fixed obligations before it creates meaningful operating profit. A promotion illustrates the problem. Lower pricing may increase transaction count, but the restaurant needs enough additional contribution dollars to compensate for the reduced contribution per order. Selling more meals can improve profit when spare kitchen capacity exists, and incremental costs remain controlled. It can weaken profit when the discount is deep. Extra staffing is required, delivery commissions apply, or the promotion disrupts full-price orders. Volume is valuable only when the economics of the added volume work. Owner-operated and manager-operated models create another trade-off. An owner who is deeply involved can monitor scheduling, maintenance, cash controls, training, and customer service closely. That involvement may protect profit, but it also means the business is buying the owner's labor. A manager-operated restaurant can free the owner to oversee multiple locations or pursue other work. Yet capable restaurant leadership is expensive, and weak supervision can destroy more value than the salary saved. Multi-unit ownership can improve scale. A group of restaurants may share administrative staff, recruiting systems, training resources, maintenance coordination, and experienced area leadership. Cash flow from stronger locations may help absorb temporary problems elsewhere. But multiple units also multiply capital requirements, staffing exposure, lease obligations, compliance work, and remodel risk. Expansion should not be confused with diversification when every location depends on the same brand, consumer category, labor market pressures, and corporate system. The agreement term matters as well. McDonald's states that franchise and license agreements generally have 20-year terms, but a buyer should not treat renewal as automatic or assume the business will retain the same value at the end of the term. Transfer rights, renewal conditions, required improvements, approval standards, remaining tenure, and restaurant performance can affect what a future buyer is willing to pay. A store with strong cash flow but a short remaining term and a major renovation approaching may be valued differently from a similar store with longer contractual visibility. The strongest reasons to consider the franchise are straightforward. The brand already has broad customer recognition. The operating system is deeply developed. Training and support are substantial. National marketing, digital ordering, menu development, supply coordination, and standardized procedures would be difficult for an independent operator to reproduce. A capable franchisee is not starting with an unknown sign and hoping the neighborhood notices. The disadvantages are equally real. Entry requires substantial capital. Selection and training take time. The operator accepts extensive standards and limited freedom. Fees are tied largely to gross sales rather than the owner's profit. The site's rent and agreement terms can shape the economics for years. Labor, repairs, and food costs remain the franchisee's problem. Required reinvestment can create large cash demands. A famous brand reduces some forms of risk while creating contractual obligations that an independent restaurant does not have. So what determines whether ownership works? First, the acquisition price must be supported by realistic cash flow, not by excitement about the logo. The rent and fee schedule must be understood line by line. Third, normalized earnings should account for a fair manager's salary, recurring maintenance, expected capital spending, and debt service. Fourth, the buyer needs enough working capital to survive weak months and unexpected repairs. Fifth, the restaurant needs a management bench, because one excellent general manager with no replacement is a hidden concentration risk. Due diligence should also test the quality of sales. Are transactions growing? Or is revenue rising only because prices increased? How much demand comes through delivery? Which day parts are strong? Is the drive-thru constrained? Are customer counts stable? What equipment will need replacement? What remodel obligations are approaching? How does actual labor compare with a sustainable schedule? Are food costs controlled? What is the remaining franchise term? What assumptions does the seller use when presenting owner cash flow? A buyer should reconcile tax returns, profit and loss statements, bank deposits, payroll records, franchisor statements, repair history, equipment lists, lease documents, and capital requirements. Any adjustment to earnings should be defensible. Removing a one-time expense may be reasonable. Removing a manager's salary because the buyer plans to work for free is not a free improvement. It converts payroll expense into owner labor. Financing changes the answer again. Debt can reduce the cash required at closing, but it increases fixed monthly obligations and amplifies the consequences of a sales decline. The correct question is not whether the restaurant can make the payment in an average year. It is whether the restaurant can make the payment after a weak quarter, a major repair, higher labor costs, and a temporary sales disruption without starving the business of working capital. Near the end of the analysis, the final verdict is more balanced than either the dream or the horror story. A McDonald's franchise can be a higher revenue operating business with an established brand and a mature support system. It can also be a capital-intensive restaurant where the owner carries local execution risk and pays several obligations before receiving a distribution. The same sign can sit above an excellent business, an average business, or a disappointing investment. So, owning a McDonald's franchise is not purchasing a machine that automatically converts burgers into profit. It is the right to operate under a famous system while accepting its capital demands, contractual limits, staffing pressure, and operating discipline. The brand can fill the top of the income statement. The owner's skill, the site economics, and the agreement determine what survives at the bottom.